Absolutely. Now, one last question on climate change, because you gave that brilliant speech. I just want to know how, I want to ask about the psychology around climate change activism, because it's become an issue of morality as opposed to practicality. And how, again, do conservatives combat this notion that if you're not doing everything you can to slash emissions, then you're morally compromised?
Right, you don't care about the planet. Well, you ask more intelligent questions. It's like, well, what do you mean care about the planet? First of all, that's pretty vague. It's like, you really think that all of our problems can be reduced to excess carbon dioxide production? We have other problems. Well, here's a problem. 20 million people die a year because of indoor pollution. Well, is that a problem? It's a way bigger problem than climate change by the looks of it. Is it a big enough problem? Well, if not, there's others. Lots of children are still starving. We could provide them with nutrition at a fraction of the cost that we're planning to expend not doing a very good job of mediating our carbon output. I think the central issue for conservatives is to stop allowing the radicals to exploit you on the guilt front. It's like, no, you're not moral because you think that the apocalypse that confronts us can be reduced to a single variable, that you know what the variable is, because that's how wise you are, and that you know what the solution to that is. End all fossil. The apocalypse is all carbon dioxide and the cure is end all fossil fuels. That's what you think, is it? You know what that means? That means you don't think. It doesn't mean you're moral. It certainly doesn't mean I'm immoral if I oppose you. We've got way bigger fish to fry than problems on the carbon dioxide front.
And yet, you look at the UN, you look
Oh,
at
yes,
the global leaders, this seems to be the #1 priority. And we are seeing entire...
That's all that psychopathic virtue signaling. Poll-driven. I know how these politicians operate. They operate on the basis of, they abdicate responsibility to idiot opinion polls. And so they stupidly sample public whim and then craft their policy to magnify their attractiveness to that whim. It's so appalling. I know perfectly well that that's what crafted COVID policy in Canada during the pandemic. It wasn't science. I know the people who were advising the people who were making the policies. It's like, was any of that science? No, it was all opinion poll. It's like, what? Really? Yeah, it was all opinion poll.
But does that scare you that that polling would show that these illiberal policies, the human rights breaches were so popular?
Yeah, well, people were afraid and they stampeded, you know. And what happened was we fall prey to the first actor phenomena. So there was a pandemic and it was an unbound problem. How serious is this? No one knows. So it's an apocalypse, right? An apocalypse, I suppose, is a problem of unspecifiable significance. It's a new apocalypse. What do we do about that? Everything we can. What does that mean? Well, we don't know. So then the Chinese totalitarians act first. Lock everyone down. It's like, oh, we better lock everyone down. Brilliant. You know, have you looked at the death tolls in Sweden during the pandemic? They're among the lowest in the European Union.
And their excess deaths are much better.
That's right, they don't have excess deaths because they didn't destroy their healthcare system, not stopping the pandemic. Yeah, it's appalling. It's appalling. It was another indication of the collapse of sophisticated policy making into a virtue signaling unidimensional problem. It's like, it's all about COVID. It's like, yeah, really, not heart disease, not cancer, not chronic illness, not the socialization of children, not the education of children, not the supply chain, not the maintenance of the economy, not unemployment, not the ballooning of the debt. None of that. It's just COVID right now. And isn't it so interesting that because it's just COVID, we get all the power? Yeah, well, you know, excuse me if I'm a bit skeptical of your motivations. And we can still see the same thing unfolding in China. They're just doubling down. They still have a zero COVID tolerance policy. It's like, great. It's exactly what you'd expect from the Chinese Communist Party.
Do you think what we did during COVID could usher in our version of a social credit system?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah, that's
And that it would-
highly probable.
And that it will be accepted by many people because, again, that
They won't even notice.
yearning for safety.
They won't notice even. Yeah. You can't believe how much people don't know these things. When I went to the UK, I talked to some people from the House of Lords. This is within the last 6 months. The most astute of the people sitting in the House of Lords had only become aware of the woke movement in the last 18 months. Oh yes, you just can't believe how much this is not on people's radar. Not someone like you can't believe that at all because it's on your radar all the time. That's not, you live in a world that's on the cutting edge of this sort of thing. It's like, people have no idea. It's like, well, why not have a digital passport? I mean, you know, how convenient. It's like, fair enough, and you can understand that. Wouldn't it be nice if we could pay for everything with our phones? It's like, wouldn't it be nice if the central government, who's woke-oriented and makes carbon dioxide remediation the priority, knows exactly what you spend on everything so they can target you tax-wise with precision? It's like, oh, didn't think about that. It's like, yeah, you sure didn't. And oh yes, it's highly probable. It'll be a miracle if we escape from that. You can see these signs of this everywhere. You know, when you go through airports now, there's a lot of automated barriers. You show your passport. It's like, well, these are automated barriers. What if you can't go through them? Well, that's the situation for many people in China. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to argue with the machine? Like, you just cannot imagine how screwed you are. There isn't, it's way worse than anything Kafka ever imagined, because at least with Kafka, there was bureaucrats. Faceless though they may have been, they were at least still human. Once the machines can lock you out, you are in such trouble. And we're speeding towards that with an immense lack of care.
Jordan Peterson, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for the interview.